One, I want to serve the nation. For 3/4 of known economic history, India has actually been the economic leader. The mind can be your own biggest friend or can be your biggest enemy. If you work hard the next 10 years, you will have a wonderful life the remaining 40 years. It gives me enormous satisfaction. It comes in chapter 3, shloka 21, which actually goes as Yad Yad Acharati Shreshtatah Tatta Devetaro Janaha Sayat Pramanam Kurate Lokastad Anvartate.
And it is so good to see someone with your kind of academic credentials being unapologetically optimist about India. Welcome, Subhu, to the episode. Usually, I think that when people look at Miglani and when they look at me, they must be getting a little bit of कि पता नहीं कौन बाप आ गया, you know? ये Miglani venture capitalist है, मैं Silicon Valley में बैठा हूँ. But when I looked you up, I thought कि कौन बाप आ गया. मैंने IIT Kanpur to go to electrical and electronics engineering from IIT Kanpur, you must have ranked top 50 in the country in 1990, correct?
Actually, no, I was 159.
159. So फिर भी top 200 IIT All India rank is something. Then to go to IIM Calcutta and be a gold medalist. It's not easy. मैंने IIM में सब रंदली पहुंचते हैं. मेरे batch में I had a gold medalist. A junior to us is a gold medalist. The junior to us, he came on the show. And, you can see there was a difference. There's a difference in him and then the rest of us. And even in my batch, Vibhor, who is the gold medalist, I just had extra respect for that. Yaar, bahut pahunchi hui cheez hai. Then to go to Chicago booth and then do your PhD in economics from there, that again is a big jump, right? So, and from there to have a career in corporate sector, then go to be an economic advisor for India, that also is a big jump. Because look at me or Miglani, right? We are set in our careers and we don't think outside the box. And I want to understand from you, how did you make that jump? I can understand कि अच्छा बंदा IIT कानपुर पे है, सोचा यार MBA करता हूँ, वहां तक का जंप समझ में आता है. MBA करने के बाद 1-2 साल ICICI में काम किया, अब चलो मैं PhD in economics करता हूँ, वो भी jump समझ में आता है. And that jump in my whole batch of 200 students that I am banging on, I think 2 or 3 people talk.
Yeah.
कि MBA के बाद PhD करते हैं US जाके.
Yeah.
फिर वहां पे corporate sector में work कर रहे हो और फिर वहां से government में jump करना, that again is saying that look, I'm gonna look at my life with first principles. Like, what do I want to do with my life? Like, yeah. It's not saying like I'm going to live my life every day and take care.
Yeah.
So that made me respect you. And I thought कि पता नहीं आज किसी बाप से बात कर रहा हूँ. So, and I'm really happy to be talking to you. And hopefully, if it's going to be okay, so मैं यहाँ बाहर बैठा हूँ. ये बाहर दिख रहा है आप लोगों को, थोड़ा हेजी आ रहा होगा.
Yeah, now we can see it.
तो वहाँ पे कुछ ditto signs वगैरह भी लगे हैं. If you can see, there's an orange sign that this is ditto. So this is right outside my office. Or every morning में 9 o'clock, there's a farmers market that starts. Mm-hmm. And this farmers market is very special. Mark Zuckerberg comes here every week. Mark Andreessen comes here. मैंने ये Palo Alto का Sunday morning farmers market है. And me and my wife, we usually go there every Sunday. And I told my wife today morning, I woke up here, I'm going to talk to someone very interesting today. So I'm really impressed by your career. I'm really impressed by the choices that you've made. And it looks like those choices cannot be made if you're not willing to look at your life from first principles every 5 years or so. And I'm looking forward to this conversation.
My pleasure too. I think it's good to talk about stuff that is not necessarily economics. I think often I talk about economics, but I remain equally interested in life. All of us, each one of us, who's had the privilege to attend institutions like, IIT, IIM, etc. We're extremely privileged. I think that's something we all have to first thing acknowledge. There's a beautiful shloka, in the Bhagavad-Gita that I actually find myself almost always getting inspired by. By the way, today is Guru Purnima, so wish everybody, I think it's phenomenal to therefore that the thought of Bhagavad-Gita is coming to my mind. This comes in chapter 3, shloka 21, which actually goes as Yad Yad Acharati Shreshtatah Tatta Devetaro Janaha Sayat Pramanam Kurate Lokastad Anvartate. So basically translated, Yad Yad Acharati, Acharan is behavior. Acharati Shreshtatah, Shresht is basically people like us who are looked up to, by youngsters and others. Yad yat acharati shreshtatah tat tat evetaro janaha. That's how, basically others will follow. Sayat pramanam kurte. Praman is basically proof, not just talk, but the way we actually conduct ourselves. Sayat pramanam kurte lokastadanuvartate. So actually, with the privilege that we've been given, there's also a tremendous amount of responsibility that comes to us in behaving in a way that we actually can, if possible, inspire. That's sort of the thought that, comes to me often. You asked me about, what made me make these choices. So, I'm reminded of when I joined IIT, one of my first sessions actually with seniors, and nowadays this word is not used pejoratively, but at that time it used to be called ragging, which was nothing but actually sort of difficult questioning, and that's all it was. I remember they asked me, what do you want to do? And I said that मुझे बाकी लोगों के समान US में जाके settle होना नहीं है. And so then, a few choice words were first hurled at me, and अपने आप को क्या समझता है kind of thing. And then I said, that no, मुझे I want to do something beyond myself. So I've always thought, for me, I think I derive a lot of meaning, a lot of satisfaction from life when, I live beyond the I, me, myself. I think that's one thread actually that has guided my choices. If you, Hindi mein jaise sutradhar bolte hain, sutra jo actually that has led to all these choices, it is that. It gives me enormous satisfaction. On the flip side as well, when I make choices that maybe in a sort of a limited way, maybe only helping me, my family, I feel a little constricted. So that's what has governed, for instance. That's why I did not, go for, unlike many of my friends, I didn't go abroad immediately. Then a professor in mathematics at IIT Calcutta was quite instrumental in guiding me. By the way, that's another thread that I think it's so many people influence us in ways that they don't even think, right? But we are, we owe a debt of gratitude to actually who in what way when, says something nice and actually in that inspires and, affects our life's choices, which is another reason why actually that shloka of, from the Bhagavad-Gita actually that is really very, very powerful. So this professor actually of maths suggested that I should, go to the... I'll mention a specific incident maybe later actually, it's kind of a hilarious incident that actually sort of put the seed, when I was working with TCS for doing a PhD. And then in IIMs, Professor Rahul Mukherjee actually was, he's a phenomenal scholar, S.S. Bhatnagar awardee. And, but I was fortunate that he took a special interest in me and, and urged me to basically do a PhD. He sort of said it in a way that I think, at that age, at slightly younger age, appeals to you. He said, sort of like, let your talent get flowered in academia. And that is something which, when somebody you look up to actually says it in that way, then, you feel quite inspired. So then I was not sure about actually whether I could or make the cut to be a good academic. And that's why I joined a research group. I was very good at teaching. For instance, I was a stats tutor in my, second year. And a few sessions actually, I think after the first session or so, the entire classroom that used to basically only taken by profs used to be full. So that is sort of...
This is during your MBA? During your MBA? Or
MBA. It's like my second year as the tutor, as statistics tutor. So that was sort of, vindication that I would be able to be a very good teacher. And that's something that I enjoy as well. But what I was not sure about at that point in time is, could I basically do research? And that's why I sort of chose the soft option of, going into ICICI. This was before it became a bank. There was a derivatives research group at that time. So which was actually sort of not really academic research, but, research still. And I therefore was able to wet my feet and understand what research is about. I spent 2 years there and then went for my PhD. And then I've actually been in academia, right? I've, chosen at Chicago again, actually, University of Chicago. One thing that used to, whenever I would hear other professors, and I've said multiple times, Professor Raghuram Rajan, for instance, was my advisor, Professor Luigi Zingales. Both of these had, a very, very important impact on me. One of the things that would stand out in a conversation at Chicago, for instance, was that people would always talk about impact. And that was what sort of inspired, In fact, to some extent, actually, maybe this is because of an academic environment, there was kind of a look down upon, those who pursued money. So I remember these famous words, when we had just joined, Luigi Zingales, who was the head of the finance group. He said, the aspiration for impact, I think, had a profound impact, on me. I think the pun is intended there. So that's why I chose to be in academia, spent some time here in the US, and then went back to India. Actually, that's something, again, as I said, day one in IIT itself, I've always, wanted to live in India and contribute to India in my small way. None of this was planned, by the way, and then the chief economic advisor thing came along. I happened to be there. So I think life there's a lot of serendipity, the only thing that I can say, especially for youngsters, is to be very sincere, be authentic, and work hard. There's nothing else that is in one's hands. Working hard is basically in one's hands. And then when an opportunity comes, actually try and make the most out of it. For instance, to give an example of serendipity, being at the right place at the right time, that's something which is what oftentimes opportunity. So when opportunity presents itself, then you actually, you make the most out of it. So when I was put on the PGNI committee of the Reserve Bank of India, I was a very young, assistant professor. But, I took that opportunity, grabbed it with both hands, and actually I did a lot of research and actually kind of academic research that Indian policy making was not exposed to. And so people, each one of those members was just wow, saying, and not a single person today can actually, they'll all say, oh yeah, we saw the kind of work. So that's the, as in some sense, when we are working, even among peers, everybody, you get one opportunity to make an impression. And actually, I've always believed in, giving my best. And I think if people remember by saying, oh, this guy was wow, then, you get other opportunities. And so I got put into the, Uday Quota committee and so on. So that's how, I think that's the part which is in our hands.
I think that is so many learnings in like a space of 5 minutes that we've got from you. The most recent one, you were talking about opportunity presents and all that. And from my recent efforts at trying to convince my 12, 13-year-old about exactly this thing, he always says, yeah, of course, I'm here. Let the opportunity come. And my last almost a year has gone in telling him, you have to work hard and be at the right place. Then you will get the opportunity. It's not going to come to you in your bed in your duvet.
Yeah.
So that is lovely. Yeah.
Let's just take a simple example. Like take the World Cup final, the T20 World Cup final. Yeah. Right? I'm sure all of us watched. One actually after that 26 run over, against, Akshar Patel, right? So obviously, opportunity was very slim, but still believing, going through the process, maybe believe, I think Rohit Sharma might have thought ki, chalo dekhte hain yaar, abhi let's not yet fully throw in the towel, dekhte hain karke. And then when, Hardik gets Klaasen out, that's the opportunity presenting. And then basically to really give it your best and, being very calm. That's the other thing actually, which is the other thing that I want to mention is that I have seen right from my, if we focus on outcomes, we end up getting nervous, we stress, everything builds up. But if we only keep the focus on what is, in our hands, which is basically effort, the way we think, etc., rather than focus on outcomes. And these outcomes could be, what people think about ourselves, what is the situation, etc. Then I think stress also doesn't build. This, I think, is a very important aspect for youngsters, because the reason stress builds up is because the focus is wrong, actually, is on outcomes. And so, yeah, I agree with you. I think that the opportunity presenting itself, people, you have to grab. But there are times when actually, and that's the other thing, right? Failure is just an event, not to let, I wrote
a learning event.
Correct. Recently in the Times of India, I just put a week or so back on the World Cup win itself, especially kids that are taking competitive examinations, for instance, right? When they don't make it, let's say, they take it as a failure, and, it's not. That's something which I had only 67% in CBSE in class 10. So, no score, no mark, no exam performance is ever reflective of what we are as a full person. Actually, it's just a small snapshot, and I think that's something which is important to not let, or for that matter, even the biggest guy actually, when somebody tells you you're not good enough, any negative thing actually, that's a perspective, I think, to not let us get poured down by some of that stuff.
Super, you said so many interesting things, and there's so much to talk about in what you said in the last 10 minutes. But I want to double click on this. That you had 67% in class 10. Yes. You would have been written off by most people.
Absolutely.
With that score.
Absolutely.
Because I remember CBSE में class 10. आपने class
anything
10
under 85 मतलब IIT में तो definitely no.
Right.
Correct. So there is a story, I mean, this actually happened, right? So I remember, being part of it. So I was just a bystander to this conversation. So, there was this madam, I remain grateful to her. She used to teach physics for IIT Madam Srinivasan. And so I remember being this bystander to the conversation. I come from a very humble background. I'm the first person in my family to go to, an entire clan to go to university. My father lost his father when he was just 7-year-old. So he only could finish school. He was in the, for most of his life, he was basically the non-gazetted grade, clerical grade in Indian Railways. So I didn't go to the sort of the elite schools. So there was Delhi Public School, which was basically the elite at that time. So there was this person who was the topper in our area. He had 92%. So there was this conversation outside her, her home where she used to teach. This person, somebody was asking him, saying, "Are you going to try for the IIT JEE?" And he said, "नहीं yaar, IIT वगैरह बहुत difficult है." So I'm just a bystander to this, and मैं वहाँ सोच रहा हूँ, खड़े सोच रहा हूँ कि यार ये हमारे यहाँ का टॉपर 92% लेके ये सोच रहा है कि ये IIT JEE नहीं कर सकता, और मैं क्या पागल हूँ क्या to actually think 67% से नहीं, यदि मैं ढंग का मेहनत करूंगा तो actually, so truth be told, it's not actually, I was just too happy-go-lucky also, that it was not the, but so I was just telling myself कि मैं मेहनत करूंगा तो मैं कर सकता हूँ. So I remember being a bystander to that conversation, and then because this was sort of at that young age, when you're not so mature, I remember walking back from there to my home. It's about 6-7 kilometers, right? Didn't want to take the sort of the tempo, auto, whatever, because I was just lost in walking, saying, just this thought, am I crazy to actually think that as a 92% guy cannot actually try that I'm willing to try? So I think it's, in some sense, that's what I would say, that nothing is actually, is a reflection of your ability. If I hadn't tried, for instance, if I had gotten affected by what that person's thinking was, despite getting 92%, he didn't believe he had the ability to crack, a difficult examination like the IIT JEE. And yet, with much lower percentage I had. And as it turned out, actually, because I had not, so in my preparation, I had to learn a lot of the basic stuff, I had to sort of catch up a lot of stuff, eventually getting a top rank. See, the thing is that it is really important to make sure that we don't make choices that we regret later. I think, for instance, if suppose at that time, let's say I decided, if the guy who has 92% cannot do it, then I can't do it. Maybe today, I might have been looking back saying, what if I had tried? Which is also another thing with actually I have, choices in my life, whether it actually was going for a PhD, then after a PhD, when I was actually here in the US, deciding to go back to India. Then, when I had the opportunity, I could have actually taken an extension as the CEA. My son was in class 11th at that time, and I wanted to make sure that those 2 years, which are very critical actually, that I am with him, much like my father actually, gave me time when I needed it. So for me, the way I've made these choices is I don't want to regret them. And I think that when you sort of keep it relatively simple, choices become easier in life.
No, I think I actually follow this myself. It's called the regret minimization framework.
Yes.
So when I'm on my deathbed, how can I make sure that I have the minimum number of regrets?
Correct.
And that
now that you mentioned that framework, I think I follow a regret maximization framework. That lets me maximize my experiences. And अगर कुछ गलत हुआ तो ठीक है, मतलब we will hopefully not regret it, but अगर हुआ तो भी ठीक है. Anyways, that's a very
Actually, so this is so there's a subtle difference, which is right. What I
and
want,
it kind of converges, doesn't it?
no, in some sense, actually. So think about the following timing, right? Where there is something before you try, and there is after you try, which is when before you try, which is before the outcome is not manifested. At that time, if you give up, you don't even try. Let's say you don't even if you don't run the race, there is no way of winning the race, right?
Absolutely.
So the regret minimization is when you're making the attempt to actually at least give it a shot. Yeah. But then after you've actually given it the shot, the outcome has come in. You've tried something, let's say, which actually was, maybe too ambitious, or maybe for whatever reason it didn't happen, right? It's a new experience. So now you basically, in this case, you have sort of maximized regret by, as they say, nothing ventured, nothing accomplished, or said differently, I would rather, try and fail than fail to try. So and life is all about this dynamic thing, which every time when I'm trying something new, I actually, give it my best, to make the choice that will basically minimize my regret. But at the same time, also, try difficult things where there may be the possibility of actually of failing. The most impactful choices are the ones which are the most sort of, far-reaching, right?
And I think you gave the right words. The way I call my maximization and the minimization was for me it is try to fail, and if we fail, फिर देखेंगे. And minimization to me feels like, and I see a lot of people doing it, and maybe these are the wrong words that we are interpreting what Vic said, because I know him. I don't think he's going to say that. It's not fail to try.
Yes, indeed. It
is about try to fail. And I think the three of us, at least the three of us, I think we are on that plane. Yes. So you were in Bhilai in your schooling because your dad was there. He was working, and
no, he wasn't. He wasn't working with a steel plant. I actually used to live in Durg. Durg and Bhilai are very close by. So it's about 7 kilometers, 6-7 kilometers only. So Durg, my father was in the Indian Railways and he was in Durg.
Okay. And you studied there in Bhilai, in Durg, and then you got into IIT despite, like you're saying, you heard that someone can do it, but you decided I can do it. So tell us a bit about, maybe 2 minutes, about how did you do it? How did you get into IIT?
So yeah, as I said, actually, there is a lot of, so one more actual an anecdote that I want to share, which is, so there was this sir, who used to teach us mathematics. His name was Chandwani, so I go to him for learning maths for the IIT JEE. He asks me my school, and then he asks my percentage, class 10th percentage as well. He says, "Ja, tumhare aise logon ka sab nahi hota," and it used to be, very sort of, he would say it the way he saw it, right? So, no sugar coating. And in that age, I don't know what was that, basically says, sir, आप ऐसा क्यों कह रहे हैं actually? आप मुझे एक मौका देके देखिए, मैं actually क्यों नहीं कर सकता, मैं भी कर सकता हूँ. And I said, ऐसा क्या है सर, actually बाकी लोगों में हमारे पापा बोलते हैं क्या उनके इसमें 2 सींग है क्या? नहीं ना, वो भी तो मतलब बड़ा sort of with a lot of थोड़ा ढींगे हाँक के मैंने बोल दिया. तो he said, ठीक है कल आ जाना, basically ये कल आ जाना, so एक टेस्ट दूंगा. So he gave me so SL Loni के problems होते थे, SL Loni trigonometry,
back. I still remember 1990s, mid-90s, SL Loni was the
so back के जो 300 problem थे, वो actually उसमें से शायद even when I was really at my peak, and I was really good at mathematics, but it's my best subject, I would have solved maybe 100 problems out of 300. So he gives me, remember actually, I have not had any exposure to trigonometry, nothing, right? So he goes there, actually, he gives me 3 problems, actually, back ke 300 problems hai, theek hai? And कागज दे दिया, बैठा दिया, balcony में बैठा दिया. And mujhse, I remember actually, I sat, I think, for maybe 3.5, 4 hours, trying to, and 3.5, 4 hours mein, I actually tried all kinds of, I think there was no, whatever I did was just absolutely meaningless, I guess. But I actually then, at the end of 3.5, 4 hours, I go to him with this stack of papers, and I'm sort of feeling a little defeated at that time, because I'm not being able to solve the problem. So, with my head down, I told him, sir, शायद आप सही कहते हैं सर कि हमारे जैसे बच्चों का नहीं होगा जेई में, मैं सॉल्व नहीं कर पाया इसको. तो he said कल से आ जाना. And then when I got into IIT with that very good rank, my father came to basically thank him. He recalls then, actually, because I was very puzzled, why did he, I was not able to solve these problems, why did he call me कल से आ जाना क्यों? So then he said कि ये बच्चा, मैंने इसको 3 प्रॉब्लम दिए थे, 3.5-4 घंटा बैठा हुआ था. मैंने ऐसे बच्चों को शायद 10 मिनट से ज्यादा बैठते हुए कभी देखा नहीं है. 10 मिनट में देख चले जाते हैं. तो मुझे साफ साफ नजर इसमें बहुत जुनून है, और ये बच्चा बहुत दूर जाएगा आपका. So and that was, so that at that time I understood actually the importance of that passion. I didn't know, I mean, he had seen other kids. I didn't know what other kids do, but now when I look back, I think, if the average was that kids basically gave up after 10-15 minutes, maybe trying for 3.5 hours was something which was, very good. So that's, I think, that...
Absolutely. In fact, if I relate that back to what you were saying earlier, it's like these small incidents, these people who give either nuggets or they affect our lives. I think that just shapes our lives. And even today, sometimes with my school friends, sometimes with college friends, and sometimes with my, family friends, how someone said something and why I still remember that. That's what shaped me.
Yeah.
And I do remember a couple of my school teachers. Now, I never gave or I never got into IIT. I did give it as a trial run once in my 11th, but that's a separate story for another day. And my dad and his brother, and they're all IITians, and I was supposed to follow in their footsteps. And but the point was that when I was in 11th and 12th, I still remember the same thing, like you were saying. Whether it's Loney, whether it's Resnick Halliday, and all those books, without going into all the list, I used to love, even if I could solve one problem in the whole week, just going after it. And where I got that from was in class 9. I still remember that professor. He unfortunately died about a year and a half ago, who gave me a similar feedback that if you don't try, you'll never achieve the solution. So if you can't achieve the solution, then keep going at it. And that was in class 9, and I remembered in 11th and 12th and all that. So I'm like, I mean, this is almost like my past coming back, and we are probably from a similar era. But I think for today's generation, I think this is a very good learning. And partly I'm saying this because I see in my house, I'm sure you've seen it with a slightly half generation before us, people have always wanted results quicker than results ever come. I think that gap is reducing, that people want results, more immediate results every day. And sometimes there are things that, you just have to keep going at it until you get those results.
There are at least a couple of, I cover this anecdote, whenever I talk about innovation, for instance, or, couple of things to talk about. One, see, if you've seen a bamboo, tree, the bamboo shoots, actually, once you, dig it in, you have to water them for like 6 months or so. It doesn't come out at all, right? patiently water it. But once it shoots off the ground, it basically grows so tall in just a few weeks.
I might add, after that, if you don't control it, it'll take over your garden.
Yeah, exactly. But that shows about the importance of basically delayed gratification. Another example, which actually, take something as simple as basically from a very young age, at least those of us who are, we have this concept of prasad, right? When you're even a 2-year-old, right? कुछ पूजा हो रहा है तो actually what is it? नहीं अभी नहीं खाना है प्रसाद, पूजा के बाद खाएंगे, right? What are you trying to actually teach the kid? You're saying basically that delayed gratification, and this is something which my father used to explain, and actually my mom, I remember very well also. My mom once, when I think I was in class 9th actually, or so, class 9th, she said, and if you go by my class 10th marks, I didn't hear it immediately, of course, what she said, but eventually I did hear it. She said, if you basically want to enjoy the next 10 years, if you don't work hard the next 10 years, you will have to work hard the remaining 40 odd years of your life. If you work hard the next 10 years, you will have a wonderful life the remaining 40 years. So, make the choice. So basically the trade-off. And
why do I have a feeling that mums in Bhilai, and even before WhatsApp, they used to share WhatsApp forwards and say the same thing to their kids in Delhi and Bhilai, and probably in Kolkata and wherever else in India.
Correct. And my dad used to say it in a different way. He would say that, he said, when you're studying actually for your exam, and your other friends are going and playing at that time, so obviously they are enjoying now, but you are not enjoying it now. But when the marks come out, right, then you will be jumping, and you'll be having lasting sort of joy. So the choice is, do you want to have joy of just a couple of hours, or do you want to have lasting joy? Things like, for instance, preparing for the IIT JEE, making it, or any of the competitive examinations, making it to these. I mean, all of us are privileged actually to get that lasting joy of being able to working hard at the right point in time. And
so in 1970s, there was a marshmallow experiment at Stanford.
Yes.
Where they gave Professor, do you want to share, or you would like me to share?
If my son were here, actually, he would say, the marshmallow experiment. I've heard it so many times. So, it's a wonderful experiment, I think. Why did you go ahead and actually share it?
So it was done by this professor called Walter Mischel. What he did was he took kids, put them in a room, gave them a marshmallow, said them, you can eat it now or wait 15 minutes. And if you can wait 15 minutes, you'll get 2 marshmallows. And then he followed up these people till 2010, from 1970 all the way on to 2010. And he saw that kids who waited this extra 15 minutes to get the second marshmallow, they did better throughout their life. They did better in their SAT exams to get into college. They did better with their relationships. They did better with their health, obesity, zeal, and so on. So I think ये बहुत ही अच्छी बात है. मैंने लाइफ में मैंने कई बार देखा है. And again, I want to link this up with something else that I've noticed in you.
Can I just pause you one second? I have this burning feeling to say this. Is if I get 2x returns every 15 minutes, imagine the IRR.
No, you get it. Remember, you get it only if you wait for that 15 minutes. And I think the beauty of that experiment is that for a maybe 5-year-old or a 6-year-old, that 15-minute, delaying gratification is essentially similar, to what a 17, 18-year-old actually having to delay gratification for maybe a year, 2 years, actually.
It's a relative concept of time.
Exactly.
Yeah, because what kids do is they live in the present. And I think one thing I've noticed with my daughter, that when I'm with her, it makes me come back to the present.
Correct.
That's when it's special.
Indeed.
Yeah. So,
I must add actually, because, youngsters might be watching this. There's this wonderful book. I highly recommend every youngster to read it, which is called Talent is Overrated. For instance, one story that I remember of this I think very, very good, maybe American football player who would run with basically put parachutes on his and would, run and train. And I think so because he would run with parachutes, his stamina he had developed it to such a level that in that game, when everybody else was tired, let's say in the last 15 minutes, that's when his comparative advantage was by far higher because he still had stamina, and some of the best plays that he did it at that time. Similarly, for instance, I think in that book, it's mentioned Michael Jordan, for instance, used to do, I think, like 3,000 sit-ups, or for that matter, take a Rahul Dravid. When Rahul Dravid had, and by the way, Rahul Dravid is my, all-time favorite, for the kind of human qualities that he actually, epitomizes. So when he had retired, his wife, Vijeta Dravid, had written a very nice article on Cricket Info. That, by the way, is one of my passions. Actually, she had written about how right from the age of 7, Rahul Dravid has gotten up at, I think, 4:30 in the morning to go to practice. That is work ethic.
Yeah.
And many times when youngsters look at people who basically IPL, अरे तो इतना पैसा कमा रहे हैं and all that, यार थोड़ा सोचो, actually उन्होंने बहुत मेहनत भी किया है. I think that's something, in general actually is for youngsters. I sort of think that envy is a completely empty phenomenon. It basically doesn't give you anything. It can only burn. The way I would suggest for youngsters is look up for inspiration, look down to feel grateful. Most people do it exactly the other way around, which is basically they look up with envy and then they look down with arrogance. I think it is actually in life, it is to flip it. Because, when take cricket itself, all through, if you take IPL, about 200 people basically play, right? And I'm sure all of us would relate. There are at least 200 million, kids. So actually at that age or, youngsters who want to be also part of. And simple concept of supply and demand, scarcity matters. If only 200 out of 200 million are actually making it, think about the talent they have. Think about how much hard work they have had to do, across, Sachin, for instance, Harsha Bhogle has spoken about when I was in IIM Cal, Harsha Bhogle had come to talk about how, Sachin would practice like he would fall asleep on the dining table itself, that kind of. So many times I think this is the important thing. When people look at successful people, they only look at that outcome. What they don't look at is the hours and hours and hours of unrelenting hard work that has gone in. You put in that kind of hard work, make those kind of sacrifices, then I think quite likely, you'll also be successful. I think that's...
I think when we are saying Sachin or Dravid, even for today's IPL players, since we are using that example, I think that's true. As in,
yes.
Who can... So the guy which I have recently come to probably respect more than other IPL players is Rishabh Pant.
Yes.
As in, guy was great. He went through something for whoever's fault it was, including his own, and then came out of it. It cannot have come without inputs. So inputs will lead to outputs.
Correct. And actually also, I think the important thing also to, think about the mindset, right? You are actually in the hospital bed. We can relate. Your leg is bandaged. It is inevitable that at some point in time, the thought will come कि मैं दोबारा खेलूंगा क्या? यार मैंने क्या कर दिया? ये क्या हो गया? It's possible कि मैं I was helping India win the Australia series actually, and I'm potential toast of town, and ये क्या हो गया? Actually, that can be if you don't have the mental strength. नहीं मैं कर सकता हूँ दोबारा. I think this is the part that even for the most accomplished people, sometime or the other self-doubt comes. The fact, because they're human. But what is extraordinary about them is they basically set aside that self-doubt and you're saying, think positively and go back and go back to their routine. That is the lesson to learn. I think this is the point, because many times I actually keep hearing youngsters and saying, "Arey, ye to alag hai, ye different." And no, they train themselves to actually develop that mindset, think positively, set out negative thoughts or keep them aside. overpower your negative thoughts, overpower your, with basically your own thinking. So the mind can be your own biggest friend or can be your biggest enemy. It is how we basically harness it. If one basically lets the negativity, occupy our mind, then, our mind is basically being our worst enemy. But we use basically positivity to inspire us, to actually channelize us in positive directions. Then we're converting that mind into a friend. And I think when you look at champions across the field, whether it's music, whether it's, sport, whether it's academia, whether it's, professional, corporate people, this thing fascinates me. The sort of the ingredients for success remain, very similar across these. It is basically a champion's mindset, very extraordinary in their thinking, which basically never say die kind of, spirit, hard work to go with it, positivity, and these are some of the elements I think that actually go into it. And the important thing is, learning from failure. You fall, you basically get up, dust yourself, and then again, run again. So
all of the 3-4 criteria that you're naming, and since you mentioned the Bhagavad-Gita initially, it reminds me, isn't it all succinctly said as karmanyavadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana?
Karmanyavadikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana ma karma phala hetur bohu mate sangostva karmani. Which is basically, so in what Krishna is saying is that, you have right only over your quote unquote controllables, right? What you can control, which is your effort, the way you think. That is what is in your control. Positive thinking, not getting consumed by envy, or instead look up for inspiration. These are things that are in your control. Not become arrogant, which is basically be grateful. These are things that I think at the same time, after you get success as well, to always be reminded that there's a huge luck factor involved in success as well, so that it doesn't get to your head. Because if it gets to your head, actually then, as they say, vinashakale viparita buddhi, actually the next failure is just around the corner. So I think these are things that are in our control, and that's what Krishna is saying. Leave the outcome to me. Don't think about the outcome, because in economics and econometrics, etc., we also stated, we say y is equal to x times beta plus epsilon. That x is actually a vector. It's like the vector of inputs, and beta is like the sensitivity. But there is an error term, epsilon. That error term is basically what unobserved stuff, could be grace, could be luck, could be parents' blessings, teachers' blessings, etc., etc., etc. That uncontrollable is something that you don't worry about. You just take care of your X. The Y is something, over time will basically... will.
Actually, now that you mention it, it's coming to my mind that what that says is that X times beta is actually the error term. The epsilon is the major term.
Well, though that's...
It's interpretation. It's interpretation, and it's also partly on what are you terming as epsilon?
Yeah,
is it past things? Is it other things that you are just not able to say as X or alpha or beta?
Yeah.
So in fact, everything else that I wasn't able to put in my equation is epsilon.
Correct. No, in fact, actually, that sort of leads me into another very, very passionate part of my life, which is about thinking about logic versus science, spirituality, etc. So if I use the same y is equal to x beta plus epsilon, think about x times beta or x basically as those that are observed / you can measure using the 5 senses. And then there is the epsilon, those that you cannot basically. And here I'm oftentimes very inspired by what Albert Einstein said. He said, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. I think so beautifully put. So for instance, 100 years back as well, cellular activity that happens inside our human bodies was happening. We didn't have those microscopes, electron microscopes, etc. Actually, I don't know, I don't remember the timeline so well, but when till these microscopes did not come, you couldn't observe this phenomena. So there was absence of evidence, but that did not imply, evidence of absence of cellular activity or many other, in a similar way, in a different sense, the impact of faith. These are aspects that actually I would put it in that epsilon. You can't measure it using the five senses. But they have a role to play. And I think the way I look at it actually is that openness rather than the arrogance saying, I know everything that is there in life, that what we see manifest is only a small part or maybe a small part, so having that openness to say there may be stuff beyond, the manifest, and which I want to, I think that also generates a certain amount of curiosity, a certain amount of, inquisitiveness to actually look at stuff beyond the manifest. I think to me, that is basically a very beautiful part of life as well.
And Mr. Bo, I couldn't have agreed. Like, I think, I've talked to many people, right? But I think philosophically, your chain of thought is closest to the way my mind has gravitated as it has evolved over the years. So really excellent. But let us shift gears. Like, एक घंटा बीत गया, पता भी नहीं चला. तो लगा कि 5 मिनट बीते. तो tell us, what does a day in life of Subbu looks like today? Like, and I'm asking the question because I'm curious. When you are executive director at IIM, what does the day in life of Subbu looks like? Do you still spend time with your SPSS statistics package, running models? Are you?
No.
What? Please.
No. That is so 90s, isn't it?
State out. Yeah. See, that I think using a stata or some of that, I think I would have stopped it maybe about 10 years back, because as you become a senior sort of academic, right, then you do you do more of the value added stuff, which is you basically do the writing, you come up with the idea, some of the junior co-authors then stuff that I myself had done when I was an assistant professor. You do the empirical analysis, so you do the data, etc. So today that is not there. So I think the most important, we're all common people. Live common lives. Just because someone has a certain position, life doesn't change. It's just the kind of activities that are there actually change. But I get up. I'm reasonably disciplined. I wouldn't say I'm extremely disciplined. I wouldn't say that. I'm reasonably well disciplined. So I would typically get up at about 6 o'clock in the morning. My first thing is I sort of drink a good amount of water. So that's my first thing to do. And then I also have warm water with honey and lemon. That's part of my routine. And then I will do yoga. I like it. I do some stretching and yoga. And then many days, I wouldn't say most days, but many days I will also follow it up with some, pranayam and then meditation as well. So, one aspect of me that actually I have sort of come to, terms with is that I am somebody who, for instance, even when I used to, let's say prepare for JEE or when I was, working on my research, I'm not the kinds that will consistently every day work for a few hours. That's not me. Mine is actually, when I'm in the mood, I would basically study for like 15, 16 hours continuously. And yet when I'm not in the mood, I might not pick up the pen at all, on some days. So it averages out. But, in a similar way, my phases on whether it's actually yoga, pranayam, etc., there'll be periods where I'm actually doing it very intensively, and then there are other periods where I'm actually not doing it. It averages out. It used to, maybe 7-8 years back till then, I used to keep wondering, why don't I have the discipline of doing it every day? Then I said, it's fine. Actually, I average it out. That's my personality. So that's something which I would do that. Then I, end up sort of here in the US, you have to actually do most of the stuff yourself. So, help my wife, with sort of making breakfast. We have breakfast and then I go to work. And typically I might also sort of do some preparation for, lunch. So but that's other aspect of, I don't like eating out too much. It's primarily my family, they say push me. Left to myself, I would not eat out at all, I would only make at home. Even so, when I'm alone, for instance, when my wife is traveling, I will cook for myself, twice at least, or or 3 times. That's an aspect of my health that I follow very, very religiously. And I don't eat ever any leftovers ever. So these are 2 aspects which is basically I follow very, 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 very diligently. So I might do some stuff, basically, cut some vegetables or whatever, stuff for the lunch, and then I come back, have lunch, then go back and I'm back by, it varies actually, depends on the intensity of the work that I'm back. Then I will sometimes do sometimes actually I do, some, chanting. I like, I love chanting the Vishnu Sahasranama, something which I write from my IIM Calcutta days, actually, in fact, it was an IIM Cal friend who actually still remember who taught me, the Vishnu Sahasranama. So actually I enjoy that very much. Say that and then watch some TV a little bit, or maybe read stuff, and then I like going to sleep by 10:30, so that so reasonably disciplined, I would say.
So Subbu, one thing that I really appreciate about you is that you're so optimistic, and you're so optimistic about India. I watched the Rajdeep Sardesai interview, and I watched how you kept bringing him back to the fact that you cannot shift the goalpost. You cannot talk about one topic, and when we provide evidence to you that, look, India is doing good over here, then you move the goalpost to say, hey, but what about that? And then you say, look, India is doing good over here, then you move the goalpost to the third point. So in Silicon Valley, there is this group of people who are accelerators. They say accelerate towards AGI, accelerate towards better. And this other group of people say, no, we just want to stay where we are. We don't want to accelerate. So one thing that I really liked about your evolution, and I think, is that you believe in India. You believe in our country. You are a fundamental optimist about our country. And I think, if you put 100 people in the room, there'll be 90% of people, they will not have an opinion. 5 people will be bad. 5 people will be optimist. And you definitely belong to the optimist group. And with that, I want to share my screen, and I want to introduce this. It's called India at the Rate 100, Envisioning Tomorrow's Economic Powerhouse. So, first of all, thank you for being unapologetically optimist about India, because I think for too long, we have not had that optimism. And it is so good to see someone with your kind of academic credentials being unapologetically optimist about India. I personally believe that India is going to do great. When I meet people, like recently we interviewed, like last week, we interviewed someone from IIM Nagpur, which is one of the baby IIMs. He's working at ICICI, your previous organization. And he's 26 years old. And during the interview, I told him that this interview is what makes me believe in India. Guys like you, guys like him, that make me believe in India. So I go to India every December. Last December when I went to India, I had not taken a train in India for 22 years. Mm-hmm. So this time I said, I'll take a train. I went to Vaishnav Devi. So Calcutta is where my family lives. So I ended up taking a flight to Jammu. But on my return trip, my flight from Delhi to San Francisco, I said, कि Jammu se Delhi मैं train में जाऊंगा. And it was such a great experience. I looked outside and Jalandhar and past like cities like Jalandhar and so on. I might be getting some of the city names wrong, but they looked different. They looked upcoming. There was so much optimism. There was, we will do better. We will be better. And that optimism, that drive, I don't see that. I see that much less even, and I really appreciate the point that you made, that in your first stint in the US, there used to be things you used to say, yeah, India mein acha nahi hota, America mein acha hota. But in your second stint in the US, you say, India mein cheez achhi hoti hai. For example, I go to the farmer's market after this. Sure, there will be a lot of places where I will not be able to pay with my phone. I'll actually have to take out cash and pay, or take out my credit card. I won't be able to pay with my phone. It's easier to do that. So where does that fundamental optimism come from? जैसे आपने एक बात कही थी सुबह कि your life has been defined by I want it to be more than me and my family. I want my life to be more than me and my family. Where does this fundamental optimism about India come from?
From many sources. See, first thing, as I said, this country has actually given me everything in my life. Look, I paid 365 rupees a semester at IIT Kanpur. 365 rupees.
Just to put that in context, that's $3, $4.
Yeah, even if you account for inflation, let's say, on average 7% inflation, doubling every 10 years, let's say three times, right? So it's 8 times, which is even in today's money, rupee terms, actually, that's about 8 times about 3,000 rupees. Okay.
Yes. Just
3,000 rupees. I think that's what I paid. So it was some taxpayer at that point in time who actually funded my education. But for that education, I wouldn't have gotten, even 1/10 of what I've gotten in life. So it's the other second thing, which actually, and this is, I owe it to my father for this, which is, my father at different points in time exposed me to, when he realized that I'm going to go to IIT, right? He realized I'm going to be part of the sort of a strata of society that typically does not sort of view India positively, typically. And so he exposed me to a lot of, the sort of the literature, and therefore I ended up appreciating that, our culture, our spiritual ethos is so rich, right? And, the way I sort of have now gotten to is that's what motivates me to sort of keep, learn about this, which is that the thinking about life, and how to live life, the way India actually has thought about, whether it's our Upanishads or Vedantic thought, atha sagar hai, and wo atha sagar mein ek boond bhi nahi chakha, to actually then, what's the sort of the
So I'll give you an example. All my American friends nowadays are into fasting. And when I told them, fasting, तो मेरी मम्मी तो व्रत रखा करती है, हर महीने कोई ना कोई व्रत होता था, तो कहने अरे वाह, they thought the fasting just got invented right now.
Not just, I mean, so many things, right? There was a lot of logic, to it. In fact, I mean, logic is a superset of science,
Yes.
Because, logic is not necessarily beholden to only the 5 senses.
Yes, and I still remember, I was in class 3 or 4, and we used to watch, I think, Ramayana or something, and there used to be Main Samay Hu.
No, that is in Mahabharata. That's not in Ramayana.
That was Mahabharata.
Mahabharata actually where he starts with Main Samay Hu.
And Viks, you are not that young कि तू class 3-4 में नहीं था, थोड़ा सा बड़ा होगा.
अच्छा ठीक है. तो अच्छा, by the way, देखो सुबह और for our viewers, मैं और बिगलानी literally अच्छा ही यार. तो जब कोई ऐसे कुछ बोले ना तो मत सोचा करो. मैं और बिगलानी literally IPL का मैच देख रहे थे दोनों कच्चे में, अभी तो 2 महीने पहले. तो जब मैं मेरी पैर खींच रहा तो
Okay, we need to edit that part out.
Yeah. So, just to finish that thought, sorry, you asked me about, see, that's the second motivator for basically, optimism about India, which is, and third, if related to that, which is something which I covered in the 2020-21 economic survey. And I think, after that, a lot of people have noticed, if you look at research by Angus Maddison, he shows this chart, from 180 till 2080, up until 1750 AD, India accounted
consistently for at least 1/3 of world's GDP. And yet, how many of us growing up young did we, where we taught that India was economically very, very prosperous as well? We were not told that.
1750. This was like just before the British came in.
Exactly.
Right?
In other words, and that was the first thing in the economic survey that that I wrote as well. For 3/4 of known economic history, India has actually been the economic leader. And that is because of the depth of thought. Actually, I have absolutely no hesitation in saying whether it is, on life or whether it's on how to live life or even on economics as well. If you go and read Arthashastra or Tirukkural, in Tamil, basically, some of those ideas actually, the way, India has, has pioneered these really deep, profound thoughts. You have to actually then fall in love with this civilization. That's the second. A third part, which actually, it's been a fundamental beliefs that, where in life itself, one can view people as a problem or as a solution. A leader views people as a solution, not as a problem. That I think that is incredibly important to be able to, because you can't do it all on your own. You need basically, if you view people as a problem, then obviously you can't build that kind of good team. And you have to, learn to focus on positive. You view, people as a solution only by looking at the positives that they bring. If the tendency is to only look at the negatives of people, then one will only look at people as a problem. And I think, as I was saying earlier as well, eventually, whether it's a country, whether it's an institution, it's all built by people. So it starts from the micro level of actually focusing on the positives of people, which is what then leads you to actually focus on positives. There are undeniably, lots of positives about the Indian economy as well. Yes, there are negatives. Actually, the positives should inspire. Negatives we should be aware of to actually, to sort of improve, but not run down, using those negatives. And I think that's been my fundamental belief, which is why even during COVID, for instance, I actually was driven by the fundamental belief that the economy will come back. I'd said that there will be a V-shaped recovery. So it's that fundamental belief. It starts from it's my spiritual bent, whether I'm looking at, at people or I'm looking at, the country or organizations. It's that belief of actually looking at the glass half full. It's a choice that we all have. I make the choice to actually look at the half full part, but there is inevitably, and not to say that I'm not looking at the part that basically is empty. That empty portion is only from a perspective of improvement, being aware of it, but not, all the time focusing on it. That's basically drives my thinking.
I want to take this moment for you to tell me what you meant by this picture that you've put on your book.
Yes,
we understand India at the rate 100. We understand envisioning tomorrow's economic powers. We understand this is a rocket, and we also understand these are the parts of the rocket. And we can understand that we are building on to be the rocket. But What was the thinking behind this book cover?
So sort of you've captured that, right? Which is, the sort of different stages of the rocket getting formed and then, eventually taking off. So the next 25 years, as the Honorable Prime Minister has also articulated, basically in a period of Amrit Kal, our demographics are such, the kind of policies that have been implemented. India actually, in this book, I project India to be a $55 trillion economy in 2047. We can get into the economics, but, maybe for a later point in time. I urge people to read the book. But, using rigorous economic analysis, I actually am projecting India to be a $55 trillion economy if we can grow at 8% per annum. So that's that rocket basically, getting formed, different components coming together, and then, taking off is basically what the idea that is symbolizing what I foresee for the Indian economy in the next 2 to 3 decades.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but right now India is around the $3 trillion economy, right?
It's about 4 trillion. In 2023, it was about 3.28 trillion.
Yeah. And I think from all the estimates that I've heard, I think yours is on the bullish side, right? 45 trillion in another 25 years.
Yeah, so you are sort of, you're pushing me to, I think, give you the economic logic. Let me do that. I think,
Sure,
just the benefit of. So, if you look at some of the predictions that have been, Ernst & Young predicts India to be a $26 trillion economy in 2047. While I am actually predicting more than double of that. So the key difference is what we assume for the, depreciation of the rupee vis-a-vis the dollar. So this is really critical when we are projecting, the economy in dollar terms. And one of the fundamental principles that I want to explain to our viewers is that the rate of inflation in a country, the difference in inflation has an impact on the depreciation.
Absolutely,
because, if for instance, if the real value of the exchange rate has to be unchanged, then the currency where inflation is higher and therefore prices are increasing at a faster rate, that has to depreciate more in order for the real value of the currency to remain the same.
Yes.
Now here's where I think, in my opinion, actually the assessments made by Ernst & Young is basically not taking into account a very important macroeconomic phenomenon that has happened over the last 10 years in India, which is in 2016, India implemented the inflation targeting regime, which requires the central bank to actually keep inflation at 4%, 4 plus minus 2, a band basically, so between 2% to 6%. Historically, India's inflation from 1991 onwards, if you look at up until 2016, has been more than 7%, actually about 7.2%. US inflation was about 2%. So the difference in inflation was more than 5%. It is this difference in inflation that led to rupee depreciation on average being about 3 to 3.5% per annum. Now, if you look at data from 2016 onwards, inflation, despite COVID, despite the Ukraine war and the supply side problems that have been created, has been 5%. So a very reasonable, actually, in fact, I would say a conservative expectation is that in the next 20-25 years, India's inflation will be 5%, not 7% plus. So that more than 2% reduction in inflation will one for one translate into, a more than 2% reduction in the rate of depreciation. So now with this basically important economic, macroeconomic phenomenon understood, let me sort of show you the arithmetic. As I said, the GDP in 2023 was 3.28 trillion. Now, if I assume real growth to be 7%, inflation to be 5%, then nominal growth in rupee terms is 7 plus 5, that's basically 12%. Let's take the depreciation as, has been historically the case. Let's take it at 3%. So depreciation subtracts value, in dollar terms. 12 minus 3 is 9%. So in dollar terms, at 7% real growth, 5% inflation, and 3% rate of depreciation, which has been the case historically, that translates into 9% growth in dollar terms. Let's use the rule of 72, which is basically a very useful thumb rule to know the number of years it takes to double. 9 times 8 is 72. So every 8 years, GDP will double. From 2023 to 2047 is a 24-year period. So 3 doublings there, right? 3 doublings. So from 3.25 to 6.5, first doubling, 6.5 to 13, second doubling, 13 to 26. That explains basically the Ernst & Young prediction. But as I said, that 3% rate of depreciation does not take into account the very important macro phenomenon of inflation targeting regime being implemented, and therefore inflation being at least 2% lower going forward, thereby the rate of depreciation also actually of the rupee being at least 2% lower. Now, let's redo the same numbers, assume 8% growth, 5% inflation, so that's 13% in nominal rupee terms. As I said, rate of depreciation should be lower, so by at least 2%. So subtract 2% from 3%, that's basically 1% rate of depreciation. Indeed, actually, in the actual calculations I do, if we grow at 8%, the rate of depreciation will be about 0.5% per year. Let's approximate it, be conservative, take it 1%. So 13 minus 1 is basically 12%. So 12% growth in dollar terms. Now let's do
6 years.
6 years, rule of 72, 6 years doubling. So over a 24-year period, 4 doublings instead of 3. And so now, basically, it doesn't end at 26. There's one more doubling from 26 to 52. And, that's close to the $55 trillion economy. Of course,
So you're assuming a 1% depreciation.
I'm not assuming, as I explained to you.
Sure. Your thesis is that over the next 24 years, there'll be 1% depreciation in USD INR rates. How has the thesis felt over the last 2-3 years? Because I don't watch the rate very closely, but I know it's been in 80s, like so 82, 83. That's late.
That's a good question. You have to keep in mind that, eventually these fundamentals start playing up over, reasonably long periods of time.
Sure.
During short periods, things like, for instance, whenever there is an economic crisis, the combination of two factors, which is basically what is called flight to safety,
Yes.
together with the home bias, which is, so most of the sort of big money really is in the United States. And, these investors, because they're more comfortable at home and, they think that US assets are safer. So during times of economic uncertainty, money moves back to the US, and that leads to much higher, depreciation of, emerging economy currencies compared to the dollar. So you have to keep that in mind. So over the last few years, I think that, you would see that there's basically the COVID phenomenon, there's been the Ukraine war. And so this is not a very good period to actually, and the horizon itself is long enough. But over the course of, 25 years, and that's what I've done. In fact, I've actually, in the book, I've gone and examined whether this phenomenon, the thesis that I've actually laid out, does it actually work in the data? I show that it indeed does. I've tested it for previous 25 years, many 25-year periods, and 20-year periods, and 15-year periods, and 10-year periods as well. So it works over long horizons. And that's why, I'm a researcher, so I will not put out a thesis if I have not gone and tested whether it actually works in the real world. I've seen that it works, and that is why I actually have confidence in saying that assuming 3% depreciation is neither, consistent, conceptually, because it ignores that really, important macroeconomic phenomenon of the difference in inflation, nor would it actually work, with the actual data either.
Quick question: in your book or in your research, how much of inflation have you taken for the US or the UK, or
I've not taken
what kind of interest rate projections do you have?
So, as I said, actually, when you read the international economics literature, it is actually the inflation that eventually affects the nominal interest rate. So the assumption that has to be made is actually about inflation. I have conservatively assumed US inflation to be only, 2%, over the next 20 years. That some commentators say that the inflation will be higher, given the debt to GDP ratio. And there are others who actually think that it should be, so the Fed's projection basically over the next 25 years is 2%. So that's what I've taken as the, keep in mind, if actually the actual inflation is higher than 2%, that will mean even lower depreciation.
And that's exactly why I asked this question, because that's what we've been seeing in the last at least 18 months.
Yeah.
And Viks can talk about the US. I can see in front of my eyes, we have, and the government changed because of that, the cost of living crisis. People cannot afford to pay their energy bills. The last winter, they couldn't pay their energy bills. A lot of people, not homeless people, a lot of people in homes actually couldn't have heating in their homes. And it's almost like it's first world problems, but at the same time, in the UK, it's assumed that this is a basic we will get, even if you don't have too much food. Now, if you add that, right now, I can get nearly risk-free, 5.3% on my money. Right? Now, economics. You've done not just a PhD, you've done like a 15 more years, more than I have ever learned economics. But to me, it sounds like a layman in front of you is, if I'm getting 5.3% in a bank or in somewhere, then the inflation has to be slightly more than that, at least 5.31%, if not a bit more than that. And that's where I come back to what's the relative inflation. And I know you said that if the inflation is more than 2% in Western economies and maybe US, maybe UK or Europe or whatever other countries that matter, then India will do better. I'm just starting to think how much better.
Yeah. So a few things. And I think you have to be careful, number one, whenever one is projecting or looking at a 20, 25-year phenomenon, to not overweight recent phenomena.
Got it.
I think that's really critical. To not extrapolate. So what you've seen as basically these cost of living crises, etc., over the last 18 months, I think we have to be very careful to not assume that is what will prevail over the next 23, 24 years. This is a very salient source of bias. Most of us tend to actually just extrapolate our recent, memory onto the future. I think you have to be very careful. We have to actually look at the last, 20, 25 year period, to be able to say something, about the next 20, 25 years. With also in the caveat that, the future may not necessarily be what has prevailed in history. But all you can when you make a projection for the future, you can only take learnings from history. But the saliency bias is something that is very important to keep in mind. So I would not basically, I would not take what has happened in the last 18 months, to comment too much on what will happen in the next 25 years. That is a major source of bias that actually, and especially I see this, in a lot of commentary, just what happened yesterday, forget what has happened in the last 18 months. People use that to project, I think that's quite, it can be
recency bias is makes your own.
Yes. I think this is a very nice, because we're talking about this, the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow by Daniel Kahneman is an essential read because he talks about all these biases that we have in our thinking, which leads to then, erroneous judgments about what will happen in the future. I think saliency bias.
Yeah. So, what's your opinion on the deglobalization that's happening, led by countries like US, which is saying that we need to decouple from, say, China, which is producing most of the goods. And I think a lot of it is based on the changing geopolitics, right? The changing demographics, the changing security concerns, and so on. And when you deglobalize, I think, and again, hats off to you, you know much more economics than the whole idea is that when countries specialize in what they do, you do it at a lower cost, right? But when and then when you trade, like you do it at the lowest cost and then you trade, then you have lower cost world over. But when you deglobalize, and America says, I'll also make my plastic baskets, right? Because I don't want to buy them from China. But plastic baskets is a simple example, but say the whole defense industry in America, they say, well, I'm going to make each nut and bolt in each drone that I fly, the cost will go up. And then I think this deglobalization is, it almost seems like the world is coming out of a choice that it made to globalize after the Second World War. And it said that the American Navy will patrol the world's ocean. It will let the container ships go back and forth. It will bring countries like Japan, China. It will quickly modernize them. But now it's saying that, look, we want to be isolationist. And I think I've seen, how do you think that will affect the next 25, 30 years?
So I'll come to that, because let me just respond to, I think, the question that, Miglani was asking about the relative strength of the two economies. I still want to answer that. I was sort of finishing up that thought. I think that question, with the caveat that, we want to be careful in extrapolating from recent past, but I think that question was a fundamentally good one, which I want to definitely answer. See, I think what is in, when I look at India, and that's what I specialize in, if I look at, for instance, the Indian economy now, you have a very young population, a demography that is, that's a definite opportunity. It has to be converted into, actual reality, and therefore job creation is quite important, and I cover that in the book as well. And I think good policies that have been implemented, for instance, a lot of infrastructure creation. You spoke about how you can pull out your phone and pay, if you go to the farmer's market as well, the public digital infrastructure that's being created, these are all aspects that actually will enable growth. The formalization of the economy. Oftentimes, when people saying, oh, how, people will say, can India really grow at, 7-8% for the next 25 years? Many times they actually have at the back of their mind, what has happened in advanced economies. We have to be careful here. advanced economies, even if you look at the last 45, 50 years, have been mostly formalized, right? Have formal economies, and so, growth therefore has had to come from productivity improvements. In contrast, if you take a country like India, and this was the case with China as well, maybe 25, 30 years back, a large part of the economy is still very informal. Anywhere between 2/3 to 3/4 of the economy is still informal. And we know very well that, the informal sector is extremely inefficient or, less productive compared to the formal sector. So just the formalization of the economy itself will actually, significantly add to productivity. Not just that, if you take, Indian firms, and now, for instance, a lot of entrepreneurial ecosystem is developing. Now India is the third largest ecosystem. Innovation, for the first time in 2019, India, entered the top 50 countries in terms of innovative, but we still have a, long way to go. So I look at these as opportunities. These will enable, our Indian firms, formal firms, also to catch up with global peers in terms of their productivity. That's a second driver that will also actually drive productivity improvement. And eventually, at the macroeconomic level, growth is all about only two things. It is investment and productivity. So increase in investment or keeping a certain level of investment and improving your productivity. So for instance, for our viewers, if you look at the Penn World Tables data, this is basically data that is used across countries to assess, drivers of growth. Productivity growth in India from 2014 onwards, has been at 2.7% per annum, compared to the period from 2002 to 2013, when it has been 1.3%. So as a result of the reforms that have been implemented, productivity growth has been more than double. Now, that has not translated into much higher growth because investment has been lower because of dual balance sheet problem. A lot of the crony lending that was done pre-2014, the backlog of that, the overhang of that has basically dampened investment rate. But now a lot of those problems are behind us, and therefore the productivity improvements can translate into higher growth. Together with entrepreneurship, innovation, the public digital infrastructure, and emphasis that is required on healthcare, education, the human capital, so physical capital, human capital, digital capital, all these together will basically, both further investment and productivity, thereby lead to growth. So these are all the sort of the drivers. So hopefully people can start seeing the picture of why I actually indeed believe, based on good economic logic, why India can indeed grow at 8%. It's ambitious but achievable, in the next 25, 30 years. Now,
that's super to hear. That's super to hear. In fact, if I might add, kind of support the points from a layman like me perspective, because my experience of India in the last few years is only the annual visits to India. So 2019, my last visit to India, this was like a couple of years after the demonetization and the effects of demonetization, and everyone was taking Paytm. And when I came back, I was like, boss, यहाँ पर तो मतलब the payment in India is like so simple. यहाँ पे cash देना पड़ता है UK में, London में.
Correct.
Right?
And
when that hit me hard was 2020 March, 4 months later, when we had a lockdown, and then there was no system set up. Now whether because in India it was because of demonetization, whether in every country in the world right now it is because of some other shock, which could be the COVID and everything. It sometimes takes a shock. So that's my point number one. But your second point, which I really loved, is in India, people are there to make it happen. And sometimes it's because they don't know. And this will be a very controversial point, I know, for viewers. Because they don't know anything better that they could get state benefits. A lot of times, this is my personal view, a lot of times I see in the UK and I hear in other countries in Europe and in the US, is that people just stay at home, do tidbits because they are getting solid state benefits every month that takes care of their groceries, that takes care of their electricity, energy bills.
So, without getting into some of the controversial aspects, I think the simple point I want to make is that there is a lot of drive, in India, and whether it's entrepreneurial drive or the citizens, people work hard, and that will drive productivity. There are lots of, not just low hanging fruits, but also reasonably hanging fruits to pluck, to be able to, India has grown at 7% plus in the last 3 decades, despite bureaucracy that can actually improve, despite judicial system actually still being very slow. We have not invested as much yet on healthcare, on education. These are all things that we can still do, so there's enough of a runway for us to, to grow. Now, let me come to the question that Vikas asked me on deglobalization. I think here, if you look at what happened in the US from the 1990s onwards, right? US manufacturing has hollowed out. In some sense, this is a manifestation of the shareholder capitalism that has been pursued in the US. Cost reduction, etc. And if you look at, overall, even the share of surplus that has gone to labor, has stagnated or in fact decreased, while share of, value added that has gone to capital has basically grown, much, much more. And I think these are aspects that then sort of sow seeds for basically democracy to reap, right? I think that's very important to understand. The middle class has not grown; their earnings have just not grown. Cities like, if you take cities like Detroit in Michigan, which were actually flourishing cities because of the auto majors that were there, those cities are not, they've seen their best days. And that does start showing up. The problem, which is something which is important to understand, is that globalization has led to loss of opportunity. Trade has, we economists are actually do talk about comparative advantage. Yes, low cost production in China, does basically help the consumer. But the consumer is also, an employee. And if that employee does not basically get good jobs, his earnings don't increase, and this generation actually is having lower income than, let's say the parents' generation, that will eventually show up in political choices that people make. I think, in a democracy, it is important to also think about who are the winners and who are the losers. We economists many times only look at basically the overall pie, saying, oh, the overall pie is expanding. Yes, but if that pie, from the pie expanding, large slices of the pie are going basically, let's say, to another country, then citizens in this country will indeed ask the question saying, what are you doing for us? And that is something which is, then shows up in political choice, and which is what is leading to some of the narratives against, globalization. I think it is important, now these are questions that I pose to my profession as well, that we have to also think about the medium to short run. Just to give an example, actually, let's say the production linked incentives in India, which we introduced during COVID. People say, oh, that's, there are some commentators who talk about that's not good, etc. The simple point is that, India manufacturing has not grown because policy has not been as supportive. Corrections have been implemented now. The last, I did my little bit, before me itself, the government has been, working on this. When policy, is working on it, there's no overnight magic wand to actually change some of this. It takes time. But when, the policy has become more favorable, manufacturing can grow. If domestic firms are not there to actually benefit from it, to basically provide employment, then that is not something that will actually work in a democracy. You have to provide, in some sense, let's say, from an inefficient equilibrium to an efficient equilibrium, you have to lay out that path, that bridge, to be able to, enable, the citizens and the ecosystem to move from the inefficient equilibrium to the efficient equilibrium. In economics, in academia, we write papers saying, bad equilibrium, good equilibrium. But in the real world, you have to lay out that path. And, that is what the production linked incentives, for instance, is. In a similar way, when you think about, globalization, those who are losing out, you have to lay out those bridges, enable them to actually acquire skills so that they can reskill themselves, go and work, and I think that is really important, because that's what if you have a democracy, and, in the social choices of democracy, economic choices of capitalism, then these short run phenomena, short to medium run phenomena, caring for losers is, I think, is very important. That's the lesson.
I think I hear you. In fact, my reading of it and I'm definitely not going to ask you that question. It will be too political about the Trump versus Biden right now. We'll discuss it over a coffee chat or a beer chat sometime else. But it is going one way, and I can hear you. It's going a certain way. And for the last 3 elections, by the way, one by one step at a time, it's going there. But you talked about economics, and Viks is a major in economics. So I don't want to steal his thunder because he had a certain smile on his face because he wanted to comment on the economic part of it. I'll just say one thing. This whole point, the trend about where the relative economies grow in terms of global economies. So UK, US, India, all that. From what you're saying and from what I hear, you're talking about India as a we. That's how I think of India also, despite living in the UK for like 15, 20 years. But I guess Viks does also. Is that how you think of India? Or are you a US resident, citizen, whatever?
No, I'm actually, I moved back from US to India in 2009. And I came back recently to the US to handle this responsibility with the IMF, in 2022. So I think of myself actually, as an Indian, and not just as a not a non-resident. I don't think of myself as a non-resident Indian. I think of myself as a resident Indian,
a global Indian, resident or non-resident.
Well, yeah, that would be. I'd be happy with that characterization too.
Right.
So, Subbu, one of my theses is that the inflation in the US will be higher because America will onshore a lot of its manufacturing, and because the cost of production will be higher for security concerns and demographics in China. Second, related thesis is that because China's most of its growth was export-led, right? Mm-hmm. India, in its growth journey, will have to focus more on internal markets. Like it will, the growth will have to be more internal focus. Like we have to produce for Indians. We can't be, India cannot be producing for Americans.
No, so here, I think in general, I do not like thinking about them in this sort of manner of substitutes. I think, both. We have a very large domestic market, consumers, so consumption. If you take basically the GDP, GDP is comprised of consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports, right? Consumption accounts for about 58% of overall GDP. So domestic consumption is a very important part of. But I think it is also important. Exports actually, have spillover benefits because actually, when firms produce for exports, then you have to continuously improve your productivity, and that helps the domestic economy as well. So I don't think we need to think about these as basically as sort of either or. It is more complements. I think India should definitely produce for its domestic economy, but also at the same time, exports are important as well. If you look at, as a percentage of global exports, India's share is not very large. So there is significant potential to grow that. I think your broader point about, inflation being potentially higher, I think there is a case. It, of course, there'll be other commentators who may potentially disagree, but both from the real economy side and from the financial side, real economy, as you said, onshoring, and therefore some of the cost advantages necessarily not being there will, potentially, sort of contribute to inflation. But at the same time, also keep in mind the debt to GDP ratio, right? And the fact that overall, unless there is enough surplus that is produced, let's say, right, there may be debt to GDP ratio may not stabilize. And that's another aspect that has to be kept in mind. So these are, parts that will, that will also start playing. But as I said, actually, I have been very conservative in assuming inflation to be what it has been in the past at 2%. So these are potentially other aspects. In fact, even I would add, for instance, as India will slowly but surely move towards more capital account convertibility, and, as India will sort of, its energy needs will be fulfilled far more from renewables. Therefore, the dependence on, crude oil, which is basically the biggest contributor to our trade deficit and our current account deficit, those will also actually decrease. So many of these could be potential tailwinds, which I've not taken into account. But at the same time, there could be some headwinds as well. Maybe future pandemics, maybe future, global uncertainty, geopolitical uncertainty. Those could be headwinds as well. So whenever one is doing a projection, one can only actually sort of do, use history to predict. But these are some of these sort of discontinuities that we need to keep in mind, both positive and negative, that may contribute.
I think Subbu, that was brilliant, and it tells me that we have so much to discuss. In fact, we could make one more episode on just offshoots of this, and maybe Viks, we might do a rejoinder episode with him, if he is still willing. But my one question
the conversation a lot.
Is what next for you after where you are right now? What's your next 3 year? Because you said 30 years is too long.
To be honest with you, actually, I at the stage of life that I'm in, I quite happy with what I am, currently. If other opportunities come to contribute, I would be more than happy to. I'm, much like I am doing now. That period of being the chief economic advisor from 2018 to 2021 was a very satisfying period. It was a period of, tremendous uncertainty. And being able to sort of be there at that time, I think gave me enormous satisfaction. So if you had asked me 10 years back, maybe I would have actually said, I would want to be X, Y, or Z. But today, the phase in which I am, actually, I'm that hunger for anything in the future is not there really. It's more, I want to, if responsibilities come along, I would be more than happy to contribute. And actually, I'm incredibly passionate about these. I will do that. But at a personal level now, I don't have any specific goals as such. That's the way I would.
Well, let me rephrase the question. The hunger for the future, especially in the spiritual terms, is usually always there. What's the next hunger for the future? Not in terms of family, not in terms of career. What's the hunger for your future?
For I think I actually, one, I want to serve. I want to serve, basically serve the nation. That's something which is, in whatever capacity I can. That it gives me enormous satisfaction. And that's something which. So that's one aspect. At the same time, also, secondly, continue growing as a human being. Continue to. I think that's the whole point of spiritual, the path, which is basically keep identifying areas of growth and continue growing. One of the things that actually I sort of take satisfaction in is being authentic, being sincere and not putting on a facade, and that's something which, of course, I want to continue. But at the same time, also identify areas where I need to improve upon as a human being and continue doing that. I think, in some sense, also the part of me which is basically not the scholar / economist part, which is just a common person. I think that part is something which I want to grow. I actually love singing. Hopefully I started singing, learning some Carnatic music. That's a goal of mine, to actually be able to sing some Carnatic compositions. And, I love sketching as well. So these are things that, hopefully I can find some more time to do these things.
So thank you once again for your time, Subbu. It was such a pleasure getting to know you.
And thanks a lot for hosting me. I expect to follow your career, and I expect to see some great things coming out of you. And I'll remind our viewers once again,
कि IIM Calcutta gold medalist means something. माने वो आसान नहीं है. That is not an easy feat. That requires something special.
Equally, I'm sure all of you, I wish you all both good luck for your careers. Just, as you go through your careers, invest in India. There's a lot of entrepreneurial talent there. I think your venture capital, your mentorship, I think is something that will really help tap into a lot of the entrepreneurial talent and drive that is there in India.
Perfect.
Thank you so
Perfect.
much.
And last words from me is thank you so much, of course. But more than that, you've taken out so much of your time, and with your family, with your work, you've imparted so much of information, even for a newbie in economics like me, but especially for our viewers. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. And we'd love to talk to you again.